Let's talk about Square Enix for a moment. What in the world are they on lately? They've been releasing so many games within the JRPG genre, and sure, it's kind of what they used to be known for, but it's a lot. It's almost like they saw the criticisms of Final Fantasy and decided to put out a bunch of new IPs to see if we were telling the truth about what we wanted. Well, here we are at Diofield Chronicles, what seems to be their answer for people clamoring for Final Fantasy Tactics. So, let's do war. Anyways, welcome back to TDT Reviews. If you get to the end of the video and want to see more in the future, be sure to like and subscribe to make sure I get into your feed. I'm still playing with the format of the reviews, so things may change in the future. Diofield Chronicles is old school Fire Emblem on steroids. I've been making a lot of comparisons to a lot of games because it really feels like Square Enix saw half a dozen games they wanted to make and said, well, we can only make one, and then proceeded to make them all. To start, the game's story really does play out like an old Fire Emblem game. Think Sacred Stones. You control a band of mercenaries, and there's a big old war happening with some shady supernatural things happening in the background. First some bandits, then some monsters, then a whole world-dominating empire. Like I said, Fire Emblem. What sets it apart is, well, honestly, nothing. The characters are fairly uninteresting outside of Waltequin, who's an insane genocidal mage with a hand in necromancy. And she's super annoying and entitled, and I kinda kept hoping she would die. Andreas is like they wanted Squall to be even less interesting. Fredred is a super annoying for the king kind of guy, and Iskarian is the hot, kind, charismatic archetype. None of them are particularly memorable or likable, and the sub-characters are roughly the same. Now, believe it or not, this isn't a bad thing. With the characters being kind of dull, it actually lets you focus on the strategy portion of the game. You won't get stuck trying to shoehorn your favorite character into a comp and force a strategy to work, except Andreas, because he's kind of OP for the entire game. In fact, let's talk about gameplay. In combat, you get an isometric view that resembles something like Dragon Age. To a point, Dragon Age is the best comparison for how the game plays out. Characters auto-attack, and your job is to position them and keep them alive. Backstabs are a thing in this game, and most enemies have zone-style attacks. Think MMO enemies. And you have to make sure your units aren't standing in the stupid. Meanwhile, you will have access to a full arsenal of abilities from cone attacks, straight lines, rain of arrows, zones, traps. There are many ways to implement a satisfying strategy. You get to take 4 squads into combat, each consisting of 2 units. The front unit controls your mobility, health, auto attack, and EP, or your magic points if you're that kind of guy. The backline characters give you access to their skills. As an example, Frederick can be your frontline character with Andreas in the back, which will allow you to move around at mounted speed and have good durability, but give you access to Andreas' special abilities. However, you sacrifice having Andreas' devastating auto attacks for the damage. Similarly, you can attach a mage to Fred and have a high mobility healer, but you won't have as much EP as you would if the healer was the one up front. There's a lot of give and take and strategy involved. Moving back to the MMO comparison, the game does function on the Holy Trinity. If you don't know, pretty much any game with a workable aggro system has the Holy Trinity, dating all the way back to the original Dungeons & Dragons pen and paper game. The Trinity is tank, heals, damage. The tank's job is to hold aggro via taunts, a healer, well, heals, and the damage damages. This is kind of where the game gets a little off balance though. I mentioned the power of Andreas earlier, and that's because he's the only person who can do substantial burst damage. He can pretty much one-shot anything but enemy tanks, and gets his cooldowns back if he kills. As long as he has a sustainable amount of EP, he can wipe an entire army on his own, especially if buffs and debuffs are applied. In my playthrough, I found mages to be almost useless outside of buffing and healing. Their damage spells never did enough damage, and they were quickly replaced on the front lines with archers, whose auto attacks can shred enemies if they are positioned properly. Knights and mounted units are great for mobility, but not much else. There's also a guy with an axe that I never used. At least for me playing on hard mode, the streamlined strategy I found was to have archers on point, a tank, and a mounted unit with Andreas attached. Applying buffs on my archers, debuffs on the enemies, and then positioning my tanks so my archers would get back attacks. If an enemy was going to cast a spell, I'd stun them to cancel it if I had cooldowns up. There's also summons, which you get by defeating large monster bosses. They range from dealing damage, to freezing opponents, to buffing your team or debuffing the enemy team. I also found damage summons to be not that great. Fenrir could be used to do some fast control, but the really good summons were Kohler and Salamander, as you could basically save up 3 of the summon resources in combat and then fully buff and fully debuff the enemy, causing you to just absolutely railroad a squad or boss. You'll notice I'm talking a lot about the combat, and that's because it's amazing. You always feel really good when you complete a map and get all the accolades, though for seasoned strategy gamers I do recommend hard mode, as you may find the game a bit too easy. Not because the game is super easy, but more because a lot of skills from various other games carry over solidly here. The music and audio exists. The game is mostly voice acted, which is super nice, though if you want the text to auto scroll, it's a bit random. I had instances where people were talking over each other, and other times when there was way too much space between the end of a sentence and the beginning of the next one. Overall, it's good. People have interesting accents, but the story just isn't something to write home about. Between the main story missions, you'll be able to do side quests to increase the power of your base and gear up. And this is the game's absolute weakest point. You always get the same thing from quests. SP, which is used for powering up your troops' attacks and skills, and a metallic item for unlocking new weapons to purchase. Similarly, if you see a chest on a map, you might get excited, but it's just a jade. It's always a jade. And you do need jade to power up your summons, but it's just not exciting always knowing what you're going to get. Going out of your way on a map should make you excited. If you see a chest, you should be like, oh man, I can't wait to see what's in it, and not, hey, look, a jade. While I do like the progression of the skill trees, I just can't get over the fact that the rewards for every single map are always the same. Overall, the ratings are as follows. For story, 5 out of 10. It's okay, nothing special, but it's not a total cringe fest. Gameplay, solid 8. Fantastic execution on a strategic version of the Holy Trinity, and there are likely other ways to play. I imagine a fast-paced, reactionary, full offensive setup is possible. Rewards, 2 out of 10. There's never anything to get excited about. It's just bigger numbers go brrr. That being said, they are well placed and they never feel like a burden, and they're usually very fun to do. The combat is just that strong. And the final rating I give it, which isn't based on the average of the other ones, is a 7 out of 10. It's above average, and if you like strategy games, you'll find this to be a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. I hope I helped you make a decision on whether or not to buy the game at full price or wait for it to go on sale. This is definitely an IP and game type that I want to support, so I do encourage buying it new if it's within your budget. It's fairly long and good fun. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It'll help me get into the algorithm, and also in the comments, tell me your favorite strategy game. I'll see you next time.